Okay, so we're here talking about twin pregnancies because you have just received the happy news that you are pregnant with twins. So we probably figured this out because you are experiencing excessive fatigue or other symptoms of pregnancy, nausea and vomiting, increased appetite, excessive mood swings, or maybe your sizes weren't measuring with the dates that we thought you were. We could have done a blood test, blood draw, and measured your HCG levels and found them to be really high for where we thought you were. But regardless, hopefully we've sent you for an early ultrasound before 16 weeks, and that gives us a lot of information, including the length of your cervix, which gives us an idea of your risk factors for preterm birth and how many babies you have. Also, whether or not your pregnancy is monochorionic, because that also increases your risks. So let's talk a little bit about that because there's different anatomy that comes along with twins. There's different kinds of twin pregnancies. Included in those are monozygotic, which I just mentioned, dizygotic, and polyzygotic. So we'll start with talking about monozygotic, otherwise known as identical twins. Identical twins occur when one egg is fertilized by one sperm, and the single zygote is divided into two. Now, the timing of this division results in different, what's called chorionicity. So if it happens between days 1 and 3, then the result will be 2 placentas and 2 sacs, or amnion and chorion. If it happens between days 4 and 8, then the babies will have a shared amnion and separate chorions. If it happens between days 8 and 13, they'll have shared amnion and shared chorion, which is referred to as monochorionic and is higher risk because it puts the babies at risk for what's called twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, where one grows larger than the other because of compromised blood flow to the placenta. So moving on, let's talk about the most common types of twins, which are fraternal twins. Fraternal twins occur in about 2/3 of all twin pregnancies, and they take place when 2 eggs are released and fertilized by different sperm. Each twin then has its own placenta, its own sac, and its own chorion. Polyzygotic is more rare and is a result from a combination of dizygotic and monozygotic twinning. It's usually associated with artificial reproductive technology. So it is becoming more common as that is becoming more common. Let's talk a little bit about nutrition because that can really reduce your risk factors, and we'll talk about those risk factors after nutrition. So you need to eat a lot when you're pregnant with twins, actually about 3,500 calories a day. And that early growth is really going to set your babies up for success as far as a complication-free birth. So ideally, within the 3,500 calories, you would be getting 175 grams of protein, 350 grams of low glycemic carbs, 156 grams of fat, 30 milligrams of iron, and of course, it's also a good idea to be taking fish oil, vitamin D, calcium and magnesium, as well as zinc can be protective against hypertension. But basically, you're wanting to keep your babies nourished. So ideally 3 meals a day with some snacking in between and pretty steady high protein meals. Studies show that if you've gained around 24 pounds by 24 weeks of pregnancy, then that is a really good initial start for your baby's health. So let's talk about some of the risk factors for twin pregnancies. The maternal risks, or the birthing person's risks, are preeclampsia, postpartum hemorrhage, postpartum mood disorders, anemia, gestational diabetes, pulmonary embolism, placenta previa, and gestational hypertension. And the babies are at an increased risk for intrauterine growth restriction, anomalies, anemia, fetal growth restriction, neonatal death, cerebral palsy, intrauterine demise, cord accidents, preterm labor, respiratory distress, and intraventricular hemorrhage. So, because of all of those high risk factors, we do tend to monitor twin pregnancies more frequently than those that are pregnant with just a single fetus. And a lot of that looks like more ultrasound. The standard of care in this community is beginning at about 16 weeks for monochorionic pregnancies, which are higher risk. You get ultrasound about every 2 to 3 weeks, and it's a little bit later with dichorionic, more close to 18 to 22 weeks, but then again every 2 to 3 weeks. And that's just monitoring the growth, monitoring the amniotic fluid. We might do more biophysical profiles, which is just checking on the health of the babies towards the end. And we're also looking out for things like preeclampsia. So we might be doing more blood work to check on the health of your liver and kidneys. Let's see, a lot of the testing is just routine that we would do anyway, like the gestational diabetes screening, which would be between 26 and 28 weeks. And that one is just looking at how your body is responding to glucose because of your lowered susceptibility to insulin. Other things that we want to be thinking about is iron. So we might be doing iron, checking your hemoglobin, hematocrit, ferritin levels in the first trimester, and then again at 20 weeks, 28 weeks, 32 weeks. But basically, it looks like more increased visits. So you're in the office more, we're doing your vitals, your Leopolds, all of those things, and measuring growth. So let's then, another thing you might want to consider is genetic screening, because twin pregnancies are at a higher risk for anomalies. We can do a fetal DNA screen, and we have special companies. We have companies that specialize in twin pregnancies, but typically there is an increased risk for anomalies, so we can look at that early on. That's something you might want to think about doing sooner than later. As far as aneuploidies go, not as common, or there's no increased risk for twins than comparing to singleton pregnancies. But let's talk about next the birth. So there's no reason why you can't have a vaginal birth. About 77% of twin pregnancies result in vaginal birth. There are some things that may influence your ability to do that, and those include if you've ever had a baby before, your age, and the position of the babies at the time of birth. So if you were in a hospital setting, most OBs will induce at 37 weeks for dichorionic twins and a little earlier for monochorionic twins, like around 36 weeks. And that is just because twins, their risk factors go up later in the pregnancy. So that doesn't mean that you'll be induced early or you won't be able to get closer to term. It's one of the reasons that we do as much monitoring, but it is a good reason to think about the hospital setting and interventions that you might come across being at the hospital. So most common position for twins at close to birth is head down, vertex and vertex. And even if they're in that position, some complications can happen in between the birth of the first and the birth of the second. Now, one of those things is cord prolapse, another abnormal heart tones, and another would be if the second twin changed positions after the first. Those reasons would all warrant a reason for a cesarean. So for that reason, I don't do births out of the hospital setting, but I'm happy to do concurrent care with an OBGYN. So we could do your prenatal visits, and you could transfer care around 32 weeks in order to get comfortable with them. There are some midwives that do out-of-hospital twin birth at home and specialize in that, and I can refer you to them as well. But right now, I just want to get you set up with all the resources that we have for families that have twins, and make sure that you're exercising well, resting well, eating well, and just taking in this news that you are going to be expecting twins, and gathering all the resources that are available to you.